Welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, I'm joined by Chicago-based writer, organizer, and podcaster Kelly Hayes, whose new edited volume, Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis, is out November 4th from AK Press. You may also know Kelly from their excellent podcast, Movement Memos, their newsletter, Organizing My Thoughts, or their previous book, with Mariame Kaba, This Radicalize You. We're recording this on Halloween, and honestly, it feels a little weird to do something spooky seasonal when these headlines about the doings of the MAGA death cult are so grim. Hell is empty, and the devils are here. As we record this on Friday morning, I'm sure that our listeners know that SNAP benefits that provide food assistance for 42 million Americans are scheduled to run out November 1st as a result of the federal government shutdown. There are a lot of moving parts here, as a federal judge in Boston has said that she is taking legal steps today to ensure that the food assistance program continues. But it's not actually just the shutdown that's causing SNAP to shut off. Trump and the rest of his MAGA death cult are refusing to use a $5 billion contingency fund, which is very much available to fund SNAP. While they repeatedly claim that they're legally bound and this is the fault of Democrats who refuse to pass a budget to reopen the government, that $5 billion can be used to fund SNAP immediately. These benefits have been sustained through such emergency funds in past shutdowns, including the last one that was caused by Trump in 2019. This is quite literally Trump and the Republicans holding low-income Americans hostage to cut healthcare subsidies that will likely bankrupt many of those same hostages. Meanwhile, AI slop paranoia videos are fueling racist, anti-poor people propaganda spirals all across social media. There are tons of these fake videos that are circulating, and they're portraying these racist AI depictions of poor people who are threatening to loot and riot if SNAP benefits are cut off. And if you have members of the MAGA base in your community that you still talk with, you might find that they're actually buying it. This is a grim reminder of why we focus so much of our coverage on the relationship between big tech, the AI boom, and the authoritarian Trump administration. Controlling the media narrative in a post-truth reality is the greatest tool an authoritarian has to control and maintain the support of the same base that they're frankly punishing and stealing from. While it's going to be staggeringly difficult to feed 42 million people through community support alone, it's time to get in where you fit in your local community. That might be organizing or showing up to a mutual aid food distribution event, monetary donations to your local food pantry, or even talking calmly with your friends and family to try to debunk some of that propaganda. Look for the windows of opportunity that you're called to at this moment and step in. Your neighbors are going to thank you. On Wednesday, the Department of Justice announced indictments against 6 people in the Chicago area in relation to protests at the Broadview ICE detention facility. It turns out that 4 of these 6 people are either seated elected officials or running for office, including Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, who is running for Congress. It's hard not to see this as targeted. I can only imagine that Abu-Ghazaleh, who is a young, progressive woman with a platform, and she uses it to criticize the administration, really gets under the skin of the groypers and extremely online neo-Nazis in the White House. We're also watching 3 cases indicting 10 people in the Los Angeles area related to protests over the summer, but a federal judge ruled that acting U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley, who's bringing these charges, is not actually authorized to bring such charges. It remains to be seen what will come of that. We'll have updates for you when they become available. Timothy Mellon, a Trump donor and billionaire heir of the Gilded Age industrialist Andrew Mellon, made a $130 million anonymous donation to the Pentagon this week. The money is intended to cover the paychecks of soldiers who would otherwise go unpaid due to the government shutdown. The Defense Department did not give any details about how exactly it would move these funds to individual soldiers. And while $130 million sounds humongous, there are 1.3 million active duty military personnel. So that works out to roughly $100 per soldier. Great. The move also breaks federal spending rules that mandate that such gifts be appropriated by Congress. Given the U.S. military's increasing reliance on private contractors, this takes us one step closer to privatizing the military and consolidating more power under Trump's executive branch. Speaking of the military, are we going to war with Venezuela? This morning, we're seeing reports that the U.S. Navy has moved a missile destroyer and an amphibious assault group into the waters off Venezuela. The administration has indicated that they are preparing to strike military targets in the country, which, let's not mince our words here, is an act of war against another country. The fig leaf of a cause for this intervention is drug smuggling, I guess, but it doesn't seem coincidental that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves and the 8th largest natural gas reserves in the world. In light of everything else this week, it feels like this news barely made a blip, but it's explicitly related to everything that we've talked about so far in the show. War is good for one particular group of people, those who run and are invested in making the machinery of war. It's explicitly bad for poor and working class people, not just because it's the working class that gets fed into the meat grinder of the war machine, but because it takes a lot of treasure to carry out. It also doesn't feel coincidental that the turmoil sparked by the administration's domestic policy is heating up to a rolling boil in the same week that these ships moved into Venezuelan waters. I get that it can be really hard to pay attention to something that's happening so far away, but during the now tied for longest government shutdown on record, this is what the administration is not hesitating to spend our tax dollars on. Without congressional oversight, of course.
Hi, I'm Zach Norris, former executive director at the Ella Baker Center and former California climate director at Greenpeace. I'm also a current board member at Convergence Magazine. I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber of Convergence. We're a small independent operation and rely heavily on readers and listeners like you to support our work. You can become a subscriber at convergencemag.com/donate. You'll find a direct link in the show notes. Monthly and annual subscriptions start at just $10 a month, or you can make a one-time donation. Any amount helps build a better independent media ecosystem, one that supports people's movements while opposing fascism. If you can't afford anything right now, our shows and print content are always free for you to enjoy. You can still help by leaving a podcast review, following on Instagram, or subscribing to our YouTube. Thanks for listening.
My guest this week is the editor of the new book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, Letters to Activists in Crisis. The book is out this week from AK Press. Kelly Hayes is also the host of the Movement Memos podcast and their own newsletter, Organizing My Thoughts. I spoke with Kelly about the book last Thursday. But as a Chicago-based organizer, Kelly's also been at and documenting protests against ICE, both in Broadview and the greater Chicago area during the past few weeks of increased enforcement and threats to send in federal troops from the Trump administration. We also had a chance to speak a little bit on that issue as well. Have a listen. Kelly, welcome to Block and Build.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, I imagine that this is an incredibly weird time to be doing book promo. How are you doing today? What are you bringing with you? And also just generally, how have you been balancing your book promo these days in terms of your own work and organizing? Because I know you're in Chicago and things are wild there right now.
It is a really strange time to be promoting a book. And this honestly might be the last interview I give about it. Not because I'm not excited about the book, but because there's not a lot of space in my brain for this process right now. I am deeply committed to local organizing in Chicago, where we are facing constant federal attacks. Donald Trump posted an AI slop meme a while back declaring war on our city, and he wasn't joking. He hasn't been able to put troops on the ground here yet, but his ICE agents, along with ATF, DEA, Border Patrol, and other federal agents, have waged war on our communities. They have kidnapped over 3,000 people across Chicagoland since early September. And I really want people to sit with the profundity of that number. 3,000 people, some of whom were grabbed while doing their jobs, some of whom were snatched from bus stops or gas stations, or while dropping their kids off at school, or while spending time with their families. We even saw a military-style siege on an entire apartment building in South Shore, where citizens and non-citizens alike were dragged into the street in the night. Naked children were zip-tied together in the street for hours. This is an alarming and incredibly difficult time, and we're resisting on a number of fronts. I am steadily engaged in those efforts because I can't imagine living in this city and doing otherwise. I love this city. And I am extremely proud of the ways people are showing up to meet this moment. from rapid response teams to school patrols, the mass distribution of whistles, legal challenges, and a whole lot of mutual aid. So many people are doing everything they can to keep their neighbors safe and make sure folks have what they need to get by during this difficult time. And we are being punished for that work as well. ICE doesn't like to be watched, and they don't like it when our vigilance interferes with their violence. So they will sometimes arrest our ICE watchers or pull guns on people, assault people, or throw canisters of tear gas at folks at protests or in residential neighborhoods where people are heckling them. But I think it's important to name that Chicagoans have not backed down in the face of this repression. We are more tightly bound together right now than I think we've ever been. People are putting differences aside and doing work that needs to be done. People are struggling to protect each other. And it's hard. We had a really hard day yesterday in my area. A lot of us were out on patrol for many hours, again, following up on alerts and raising the alarm about ICE when we spotted them. And, too often, the most you can do in these situations is document the damage done. But there are definitely people who are still in their homes, in their communities, and with their families where they belong because of the community defense work that's happening. ICE can count the number of people they've taken, but there's no way for us to count the number of people whose abductions have been prevented by our communal efforts. But we know that those wins are happening, and each and every person who's taking action, who's wearing a whistle, who's walking patrol or doing rapid response or communications, everyone who is throwing down in any ways is part of making that happen. So, because this isn't the kind of effort that is carried out by heroic individuals. It's an ecosystem of collective care and defense, and each of us is a node in that ecosystem. And I think that's something that all of us need to internalize right now. This is a time when we need to do our part without ego, without the expectation of personal gratification or the need for spectacle, and know that it matters and that we're all part of making every escape, every moment of rescue, every bit of safety and care created possible. And the only reason I've been able to make any space to discuss and promote this book amid all of this is that I really believe this book can help us right now. I think it's exactly what a lot of people need. But even knowing that and believing that, this might be my last interview about it because I am tired and I have to really budget my strength right now.
Yeah, no, that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. I'm really glad that you made the time to join me today. And thank you for all that important work that you and your community are doing in Chicago. I actually last week here in the Bay, we had this sort of moment where it seemed like maybe it was going to start going down. And I don't really know what happened. I suppose we're never going to know really what happened. But thinking about, reading your dispatches from Chicago, stuff like that has really helped. I know a lot of the folks here on the ground in the Bay think about what is the infrastructure we want to build? How do we show up for each other? And last Friday, a friend and I we just went out. We printed out a bunch of flyers with the Alameda County, which is the county I live in, the legal aid number, and put them up around the business district I live near. And it was amazing to see the different kinds of people who stopped us and asked us what we were doing, asked us for advice, wanted a copy to put up in their neighborhood because this is a commercial district. There's a big park and there's 2 grocery stores. So there's all kinds of people. And it was just one of those things that we did after work, and that the way that this level of repression is kind of bringing people together is wild to me. That a lot of these people who I would not have expected to have given me the time of day otherwise, were coming up to us and being oh, can I take a flyer? Can I, it's really, and I think a lot of that is people are paying attention because of the storytelling that you all are doing from the streets of Chicago, telling people what it has been like, and getting the story out that people are noticing, people are paying attention, and that's huge.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Well, let's then turn a little bit to talk about the book. as you as you mentioned, it does feel right on time right now. Certainly, it did for me reading it. But could you tell me a little bit about where this concept came from, and how you went about putting the book together?
This book started the way most of my projects start. I had an idea. I ran it by my friends, and when my friends thought it was a good idea, because not all of my ideas are, I asked, who wants to do this with me? This book was built from the web work of my relationships. I think of it as a care package for people living in struggle that I made for folks with my friends. If you've ever gotten together with a group of people to make care kits of some kind for people, that's what making this book felt like for me. It feels more like a project I organized than a book that I edited. In the beginning, I didn't know if it would be a book or a zine. I figured if only a few of us followed through on this idea of writing letters to people experiencing a particular type of crisis in our movements, we would have a really great zine. But ultimately, 20 of us followed through. And so as the letters rolled in, it was clear we had a book on our hands. I was really honored that people felt invested in the idea and that people tapped into some really intense experiences and leaned into their vulnerability to share insights and advice that might be useful to people who are struggling, because that reflected a lot of trust in me as an editor and as the person stewarding this process. There are letters in this book about suicidality, grief, and surviving assault. Those aren't easy things to write about, but these authors have navigated those struggles and wanted to create something that felt like an outstretched hand to give people someone and something to grab onto when these thoughts are thrashing around in their heads at 3 a.m. There are letters about experiencing crushing defeats, about being terrified of collapse or the rise of fascism and the dominance of big tech. There's a letter about being fed up and wanting to quit, and that one was written by me. And people just really shared a lot of their wisdom, experience, and thinking around these challenges. And, I was in the woods recently with some organizer friends, and there were these moments on the trails when we would hike across a dried up creek and have to make our way up the side of an embankment. And each time someone made it to the top first, they would turn around and extend their hand in case the person behind them needed help getting up there. And that's what this book feels like to me, because we're all in uncharted territory right now. We're all on this journey together. And when we overcome an obstacle, we have to turn around and extend what we can to make sure others can make it too. And so I think that this book is coming from that place and that spirit, and understanding that, we're living in this intense moment of crisis, and we're going to be navigating crisis after crisis for some time now. So it's an offering to, one act of care, of collective care, that I hope represents the kind of collective care we can all build together to get through these times.
Yeah, totally. Well, one of the things that also struck me reading it is that there's kind of this, I've listened to Dean talk about his most recent book, and this sort of like tension around the need to produce some, I guess, like a body of work that helps us as like people who are involved in movements as people sort of navigate the challenges of being a human being in accordance with our personal and political values. I'm also thinking about Sarah Jaffe and Craig Gent's podcast, Heart React. There's a sort of like growing body of like, I kind of hate calling it movement self-help, because it sounds, I don't like, there's so much that the term self-help evokes that like is like actually sort of antithetical to the way that we think about personal and collective care, right? But I'm curious about the way that you see this sort of like genre emerging, because I do think it's really important, especially in this moment where so many new people are getting involved in our movements, and like there are sometimes it feels like there are not, even though there's a ton of wisdom out there, there's not necessarily a ton of roadmaps to navigating some of the hardest parts of being in movement. So yeah, I'm wondering what you think about the sort of like emergence of that genre, and then, you know, the way that you see some of this work in conversation with the book.
You know, I see it as really engaging with our humanity and, you know, staying human in dehumanizing times. I think we need to engage with the wholeness of ourselves. You know, I'm really grateful for Dean's work and for Sarah's work, and I'm also grateful for the ways I've grown, you know, as a result of some of the kind of reflection and engagement that is discussed across Dean's work, and some of the work that I've done in a project called Understory, which is a spiritual and emotional support group for activists that I co-facilitate with Tanuja Jagannath. We need that kind of space. You know, I often say that we don't work for our movements. We constitute our movements. So if we're burning out and falling apart, so are our movements. And I think some of us came into movement work under some bad influences. There was a lot of masculinist energy, and still is, I think, that leads to folks guilting people for needing space to heal and grieve, and mocking people for saying we need joy. And it's such bullshit. Those people with those attitudes aren't building anything sustainable, except for maybe a clubhouse of like masculinist jackasses who brag about how hard they are on themselves. I can remember last year, some students organizing in defense of Palestine were getting attitude from some of their co-strugglers for saying they needed to make some space to process grief and trauma. These hypercritical people in their sphere were saying, what right do we have to expect to grieve or to process trauma when the people of Palestine don't have that? So what that really translates to is, what right do you have to have basic human needs when other people's basic human needs are not being met? And my first response to that is always, movement work is not about what anyone has a right to fucking expect. It's about what you can actually organize people to do. You cannot organize people you have contempt for, and you cannot organize people who don't trust you. And if you grind people under and basically just tell them to burn out and destroy themselves because injustice is intolerable, so how dare they expect rest, laughter, healing, or any space for grief in their lives, why the hell would they trust you? Why would they put themselves in your hands? The people who are experiencing the conditions we are outraged at any given time usually are not choosing to experience those conditions, because no one would. When we join something or follow someone's leadership, when we volunteer ourselves for something we literally don't have to do, that comes from trust and belief. That is the product of having confidence that the effort is worthwhile and meaningful, and that if we pool our collective capacities and make meaningful political commitments, we can actually do good things together. That's about relationships, not about some standard about what people have the right to expect in a cruel and unjust world. We are trying to make and enact justice. Obviously, that's going to look different than the structures of oppression we're opposed to and what they let loose in the world. I'm sorry, I have really strong feelings about this.
No, I'm like, let them cook.
We need to take care of each other, and we have to learn to reach for each other, because so many of us are disconnected and don't know how to connect with, or even sometimes how to tolerate each other. And that's also where some of this masculinist bullshit comes from, right? It just comes from a kind of ineptitude that people are trying to express as a competence. And that's horse shit. But I want to say that, when we were preparing for what's happening in Chicago right now, when it was me and 60 activists and organizers from around the city going over this worksheet I had worked on that was based on the work of Interrupting Criminalization, that was about mapping community care and defense in our neighborhoods. One of the things on that worksheet that people needed to address was how they were going to manage conflict in their groups.
Yeah.
Because you have to have a plan for conflict, because if you don't, when it happens, all of the bad impulses reinforced by this society are what kick in. Like those reflexes are there. There has to be an alternative plan. There has to be a political commitment to, when the harm happens, when the hurt happens, we do this. And we also need to do the self-work of being able to have those commitments. This isn't self-indulgence. Like, this is what makes us able to sustain, what makes us sustainable partners in the work. And I can remember a day recently when I was in the streets on one of these long days when ICE was just hitting the community over and over, and it's frustrating and it's painful, and we're doing some good, but it's painful. And I was going to miss Understory, that support group that I co-facilitate. And it was fine, and Tanuja was going to cover for me, but I had a moment where somebody said something wrong and I could feel something welling up in me in response that was disproportionate to what this person had said. And I could feel that it was pain coming in from the day and the frustration and the injustice, and that I can't punish those people. So, but this person who actually cares what I think, like, I could break their heart. And so I could feel this stuff rising up in me. And I was like, you know what? I have a commitment. I have to get to this support group, and I'll be back out later. And so I went and I sat in on Understory, and I was a completely different animal by the end of that session of sharing with folks and talking with folks and re-regulating my nervous system. And, I was able to have a sensible conversation with that person later about, like, you said a thing and this is how it landed with me. And this is why I'm not really cool with that. And like people who care about each other, we worked through a thing. And like, we need to have the capacity to do that. And we have to be honest about the fact that this society has not equipped us to do that. So if our experiences up to now haven't readied us to show up in these ways for each other, then we have to create the containers, the spaces, and the practices that allow us to do that. Otherwise, our shit's just going to keep blowing up and failing all the time because we don't know how to handle ourselves and we don't know how to be people together.
Well, and it strikes me that it's like, this is about, it's like a step beyond the sort of like adage that you can't pour from an empty cup. It's actually that, like, you're going to pour something. and it's not going to be cute, and it's actually going to be like cross purposes to what you're trying to do. And that, like, one of the things about this like movement self-help genre is like, it is trying to figure out how not just we avoid doing things that are not additive, but like we avoid doing things that are actively harmful to the things that we're trying to build and realize in the world. And I think that, like, a lot of our listeners who are experienced probably are nodding along being like, oh, I know exactly what that looks like.
People will say all the time, organizing is about relationships. And I think the percentage of people who say that, who really internalize that and what it demands of us, needs to expand. Yeah.
Well, and the range of experiences that your contributors are writing about are about things that happen in relationship of any kind, right? That, like, loss, like feeling unwell in a sick world, any kind of like physical or emotional suffering. It's like, this is what happens when you're in relationship. It's not specific to our political communities or our movement communities. It's general in some way to the condition of being human, where, like, we have limited capacity. We are finite beings in time and space, right? Like, and with that comes anguish, and preparing ourselves to move through that anguish with each other is, you rightly say, as you rightly just said, it's just like, our society doesn't really prepare us for that. If we're not taking that seriously, what are we doing? I'm also thinking about our listeners who are experienced movement people. And I think that, like, I will count myself amongst this group that, like, while reading the book, I was also thinking about those of us who've been in movements for a long time and, like, moving through this moment that we're in right now politically, that, like, I think this feeling that what we're doing is inconsequential is a really familiar feeling, whether it's because of a specific campaign loss or it's because of the way that we perceive and make sense of the trajectory of the world. And I feel like that's like a huge theme across most of the contributions in the book, right? Like whether it is about something big and structural or like climate change or something like interpersonal around grief, loss, rupture with somebody that you value, a comrade or a loved one. I'm curious about what you think some of the biggest, most valuable offerings for those of us who have been around the block a couple times in movement and are feeling like, wow, nothing I do really matters. Like everything I do is so small. What do your authors have to contribute to those of us who are going through those feelings these days? Because I feel like it's a big one for a lot of people.
I think Chris Begley's piece about collapse is really important for those of us who might feel like our actions are inconsequential. You know, as Chris says, we don't look at a child and ask, what's the point? Why educate them? Why feed them? They're just going to die someday. We routinely invest in things that will not last forever. And also, I really want to point out that no matter how bleak things may seem, the future in its totality has not been written. Not only is our story not over yet, but our story is not singular. Of course, every act of kindness, every act of courage, every action we take to build a culture of care in opposition to the death-making, dehumanizing forces we're up against matters. Every hungry person who is fed, every immigrant who is protected, every alienated person who realizes they're not alone. The larger victory we want doesn't happen without countless people in countless places waging those smaller efforts and bringing their whole self to that struggle. We have to fight for the person next to us and our neighbor down the street like we are fighting for everything that matters to us and everything just and decent in this world, because that's what it takes to get there. It takes all of us refusing to abandon people. You know, pop culture stories with superhero messiah characters who save the day have really messed up our heads. People sometimes think that they're a hero or a zero, that when the point is to be a part of something, the point is to break free of these lies we're fed about individual greatness or destiny and fucking find each other. The change we want is going to happen because we reach for each other and because enough of us do whatever it is in our power to do. I'm not saying big things won't sometimes be demanded of particular people. That happens. But that's not what most of this is about. A real resistance movement is a fabric, and we have to weave ourselves into that fabric in all the ways that make sense for us. Sometimes that involves a lot of courage or sacrifice, but it rarely involves glory or all or nothing moments. We all have to be willing to do the stuff that feels boring or unsexy or unrewarding because someone has to, and it adds up. The upside to all of that is that when we figure out how to reach for each other and we find each other, we actually have each other. And I can say from experience that finding your people changes everything. And I want that for all of us.
Yeah, no, I think that really resonates with me for sure. And and also thinking about that fabric makes any individual failure also feel less high stakes too, right? That failure does not mean failure of one thing, one event, one action, one campaign does not mean doom for all of us. That as long as there's breath in our bodies, there's a fight to be waged. And there's a way that you can learn from that and grow from it and do it better next time.
There's always a next right thing. And I need everyone to remember that. And, there was a moment yesterday, there was a particular moment that I know was hard on a lot of people who were on ICE patrol when someone was abducted. And there were people who knew something was happening and were trying to get there. And there were people who were there, but they weren't able to intervene in any way in what was happening. And a lot of people felt really emotionally fucked up by that experience. And that's real, and that pain is real. And I hope that everyone is availing themselves of whatever they need to tend to the soft parts of themselves that make them a caring person that would show up like that in the first place. I think that's deeply important to remember, to not let ourselves harden, because it is that vulnerability that actually makes us the people that are out there to begin with. But also that even though this was awful, there's a next right thing. There's always a next right thing. And there's always more to protect and more to fight for. And we are all needed in this struggle as it continues.
Absolutely. With an eye to that, thinking about the book, what are some of the things that you learned as part of the editorial process here? Because I know that like a lot of this was like you in conversation with people that you have been organizing a lot with, but there are things that this process revealed to you about organizing, about the state of our movements, about what it is we all need as humans, that was new or maybe reaffirmed for you.
You know, these are people I'm constantly learning from. I'm really lucky that I've been in thought partnership and struggled alongside a number of these people for years. Tina Danner was part of the Lifted Voices Collective with me for about a decade, and we did a lot of movement education work, and we planned and executed a lot of direct actions over the years. And I learned so much from her during that time about what it means to really welcome parents and families into this work. You know, I don't have children, and I was really grateful for the ways that, you know, Atina would share her insights to help the rest of the group understand what it means for a parent to engage with some of the things that we're doing. And, you know, I'll never forget a time when we really specifically tried to plan this action so that Atina had this really meaningful role, but also wouldn't be one of the people who went to jail, because we wanted her home with her kids that night. And then some things went awry, as always happens in a direct action. And she was in the hands of the police. And I felt so bad. And I called her partner and I was like, hey, so the action's happening. I'm really sorry. The police have Atina. I think she's being arrested, and that wasn't supposed to happen. So I just wanted to let you know. And Atina's partner said, okay, thank you for letting me know. And thank you for organizing. and yeah, they're a great family, but fortunately, Atina was able to slip out of the grip of the police that day. It was a very chaotic situation, and I think she just kind of wandered off, and they forgot that they meant to arrest her.
Incredible.
But, you know, she brought that kind of wisdom about parenting to this book, but she brought it in the perspective of talking to someone who is feeling alienated as a parent. And, you know, I notice more over the years since working closely with Atina when I think that we're moving in ways that maybe aren't welcoming to families, or that maybe are going to make this something that a parent can't participate in as easily. And for example, like I leave meetings when they're supposed to end. Like I leave things when they're supposed to end. And sometimes people will side eye me and be like, we're still talking about it. And I'm just like, no, we have to respect people's time. Like you can't expect people who have children to take care of, and, you know, and elders to take care of, and like really difficult schedules to commit to these things if we're not going to respect people's time. So no, I'm not going to stay a little later just because I could. The meeting ends when the meeting ends. And, you know, I like more people need to have that kind of awareness. But if you're moving in a space where people don't have that kind of awareness, then you really need the support and wisdom, I think, that Atina offers in that piece. And so I'm really grateful for what she extends in terms of helping people think through, you know, their expectations and what to ask of people, and what to expect of themselves, and being fair to themselves, because keeping a whole ass person alive,
it's so hard.
Like, that's such a whole thing. And to try to do justice work at the same time. I really appreciate what she extends to folks who may be feeling alone in that struggle. And I think we need more of that. I was also just really surprised by some of the topics people chose to pursue. People shared personal truths in this book that I never would have asked them to share. And I think that's a really powerful reminder of how brave and generous my friends and co-strugglers are. And that's something I already knew, but there are a lot of reminders in this book of just how loving, generous, and brilliant this collection of folks are. There are also a lot of reminders that of the work that's happening all around me and in the distance right now. And I'm really, really grateful for the solidarity and strength that people are showing in these times. I'm really grateful for the light that this book offers us in a dark time. And I find myself reaching for it lately. And I think I will continue to do that as things get rough in all the ways that they're getting rough, and as I nurse my wounds. And I hope others experience the book that way too, as something that moves them and helps them as they read it, and as something they can keep coming back to for, a spark of hope or some encouragement or a reminder of how to get unstuck.
Yeah. I like the format too of having people write letters to maybe a different version of themselves, somebody that they know, and so that when you pick it up, you feel like those people are speaking directly to you. Like, was that always part of the concept, or was that something that emerged over time?
That was always the concept. The idea was you're writing a letter to a friend or co-struggler you haven't met yet, who's in this situation that you have something to say about. And that was really the original prompt. There were a few people who, like Shane Burley, I kind of assumed we were talking about a letter that related to fascism, because that's what Shane and I have talked about for years. Yeah. But with a lot of folks, I was just like, we're trying to address some of the stuff that we know happens. Like, if you're in the movement long enough, you experience a crushing defeat, or you experience the violence of repression. So we wanted to address some of those things that just we know are going to happen, and then maybe some of the stuff that we know that's very specific to this era and very daunting about the moment we're in, like fears around climate collapse and catastrophe. And folks came to me mostly saying, like, I think I'm going to do this topic. And every time I was like, yes, we need that letter. Absolutely. We need that fucking letter. And some of them, it's like, wow, 2 years after we started having these conversations, we need that letter so much more now than we did then.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's such an ingenious format, because it is so personal in that way. And it makes it about the writer's experience without sort of I don't know, making it like this is the one narrative of how this thing works, right? That there's something about that formally it gets into some of the themes you were talking about around the fact that there's so much going on in a human relationship, right? There's not just one narrative of it. There's a lot of ways to understand it. So I think that's, I don't know, as a person who thinks about, form and the way that we present content, I think there's something really, really neat about that, and very thoughtful about that. And that makes it incredibly accessible too. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's something very personal and human about letter writing. It's an important movement tradition, and I think it also stands in contrast to, the way our words are being stripped down by expectations of brevity, or by the norms of social media, that are shaped by algorithms. In some ways, it feels like a reclamation to just do something very personal. And, Beatrice Adler-Bolton called it a strange book. And I appreciated that because I do think it is a strange book. And I love that.
That's such a good compliment. That's fantastic. Is there anything else that you think our listeners should know about the book? Any sort of things, especially about process, that really stand out to you?
So in terms of other things to know about the book, I think what I want people to know is that this is for you, that we appreciate you. This book was made by people who know that it's hard to give a damn, that just by letting in the pain of this world and caring and being upset about it, you are doing something that a lot of people aren't. That's a beginning. And I want to thank you for having the curiosity, for having the care and the concern to let some of that hard stuff in and to contemplate and move in the direction of doing something about it. Like, I appreciate you for that. I know it's hard to engage in the work of activism and organizing in this moment where everything feels so challenging and overwhelming. We appreciate you so much for that. And we want you to be supported, and we want you to have something to reach for in the moments when this all feels fucking impossible, or where there is nothing in the realm of your experience, nothing your touchstones are telling you that makes you feel equipped to make the next right move. And so this is just an offering, just a gift, just a little care package that we hope will help you navigate those moments a little better, because we care and we want you to make it, and we want all of us to make it, and we want you to be able to stay in our movements and stay in this world with us. And I hope that we keep building projects together towards that end. And I hope that this book inspires you to write letters of your own and create your own idea sharing projects and your own support efforts. You know, I hope this is the beginning of something for you, and not simply something that you flip through. I hope this book lives in a larger process of care and creativity in terms of how we keep showing up for each other.
Fantastic. Well, Kelly, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for making the time amidst all of the horrors. And thank you for your contributions. The work of helping people find their way and make sure that people are not lost along the way is incredibly valuable. And yeah, we need it now, you know, not to sound trite. We need it now more than ever to make sure that people are not falling off and burning out. So thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Kaden. It's always so good to talk to you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thanks again to Kelly Hayes for joining me this week. Links to get Read This When Things Fall Apart and follow Kelly's other work are in the show notes. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Kaden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Editorial assistance is provided by Akin Allah, and Kimmy David designed our cover art. Convergence Magazine is a proud member of the Movement Media Alliance. You can learn more about the MMA at movement-media.org. And if you have something to say, please drop me a line. You can send me an email that we'll consider running on an upcoming mailbag episode at mailbag@convergencemag.com. Finally, of course, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure that our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.